Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video Active Directory Domain. In this video, I will be creating an Active Directory domain infrastructure for our fictitious company, Ben & Brady's Ice Cream Corporation. What we will do is the following. We will go to DC1, and on DC1, we will run the process known as DC promo to install our new domain. The new domain will be called benandbrady.com. And then what we will do is perform a backup of the Active Directory on DC1. Later on, we will use that backup to create our additional domain controller on DC2. Then we will test the replication between DC1 and DC2 just to make sure that all the objects in our Active Directory can be replicated. And finally, we will go to our XP professional computer, namely client 1, and join that computer to the benandbrady.com domain. So let's get started. Let's look at the figure of a network diagram. So here we go. What I'm going to do is the following. Go to DC1, and on DC1 we will first check out our TCP/IP configuration. This is extremely important because this is going to be a base computer on which we will install the domain known as benandbrady.com. So let's do that. I'm going to minimize the screen and then, like before, take you to DC1. So here are my connections open. We need to go to DC1. I'm going to log in as the administrator, and I'm in. Now let's check out our TCP/IP configuration. To do that, I'm going to right click on My Network Places, go to Properties, and then select the local area connection, go to Properties, and then double click on TCP/IP Properties. So here we go. The IP address of this computer is 200.1. Here is our subnet mask, and here is our DNS server. This computer, DC1, will also be our DNS server. So the IP address will be 200.200.200.1. Please remember, in Active Directory, DNS plays a very important role because DNS service is a service locator service for Active Directory. So we have to make sure that the DNS is set up correctly in our network. In benandbrady.com domain, we will have simply just one DNS server, namely 200.200.200.1. So I'm going to click on OK over here, and let's get started. Before we go there, let me show you one more thing. When I right clicked on My Network Places and went to Properties, you may have observed that there is a NIC card which has a cross over here. Please do not worry about this one. I simply have two network cards in my computer, and I have not connected the second NIC card to the switch. So please ignore this. If you will not see this in your computer unless you have two network cards and a second network card is not connected. So I'm going to close this, and let's start making this a benandbrady.com domain. To do this, I need to run a process known as DC promo. To run this process, you need to go to Start, click on Run, and then type DC promo in the box over here. So here we go. Let's click on the OK button. This will start the Active Directory installation wizard. So here's the welcome screen, or the first screen of this wizard. I'm going to click on the next button, and now it will be reminding me about the operating system compatibility. Since in our network we have clients or servers as XP or 2003, we don't have to worry about compatibility with Windows 95 or Windows NT 4.0. Please remember that there are some features in Active Directory that cannot be applied to these client installations. So we don't have to worry about it. I'm going to click on Next to go on to the next screen. This is an important screen. We have to choose the type of domain controller. So domain controller type, and over here I have two choices: domain controller for a new domain, or the second choice is additional domain controller for an existing domain. In our case, because we are setting up the very first domain controller, this choice is correct. For the second domain controller, namely DC2, I'll be choosing this. So let's keep the default selection of domain controller for a new domain and click on the next button. Over here I have three choices: domain in a new forest. In other words, we'll be creating a new domain as well as a new forest. What the forest is, I'll let you know in a moment. This would be a choice if you are creating a child domain in an existing domain tree. We do not have a domain tree, we do not have a domain forest, so we don't need a selection at this point. And last but not the least, if you're creating a new domain tree in an existing forest. So what is a forest? Well, in general, if you install a domain controller on the first, if you install a new domain on the first domain controller, what happens is not only are you creating a new domain, you're creating a new tree as well as a new forest. A forest is nothing but a collection of domains arranged in a hierarchical manner. So in other words, our domain is going to be called benandbrady.com. Well, if you wanted to create a child domain, let's say the child domain was called Chicago, then a child domain would be called chicago.benandbrady.com. That would become a child domain. If Ben and Brady were to go out and acquire a new company, let's say the name of the new company is Global Ice Cream, then, and if Global Ice Cream had their own Active Directory infrastructure such as globalicecream.com, you would be able to incorporate the second tree, namely Global Ice Cream, into the same forest known as benandbrady.com. In other words, you would have one tree which would be benandbrady.com, you would have a second tree which would be globalicecream.com, and both of them would be part of the same forest. In other words, you would be able to create users and resources and go on to any domain in either of those and be able to log in and access each other's resources. Okay, so I thought that I think that is information enough for you to make a decision. In our case, we're creating a brand new domain, a brand new forest, so we'll keep a selection over here and continue with the next button. This is where you type the name of the domain. In our case, it will be benandbrady.com. Let's click on the next button. What is going to happen now is this computer DC1 will try to contact a DNS server and see for the uniqueness of this name. Obviously, if a domain benandbrady.com exists on a 200 network, it would have given me a message saying that, well, that's not acceptable. Okay, it did not do that, and now it's suggesting a NetBIOS name of Ben and Brady. Here are some tips. Make sure that this name comes up automatically. If this does not come up, you have some connectivity issues in your network. Usually this happens if your NIC card is not connected and and the DC promo process was not able to go out and query the DNS server, or it queried a DNS server but could not find the uniqueness of the name Ben and Brady. So usually I keep this as a litmus test. If you see the name of your domain without the .com, that means that it found that benandbrady.com does not exist. This name is unique and you can proceed ahead. Sometimes there can be a scenario where you will have benandbrady.com name show up over here as benandbrady1. This simply means that perhaps there is another domain that has a name that is matching to this, and it is just suggesting that the NetBIOS name should be benbrady1. Or sometimes, and this is a mistake that a lot of people make, they will go on and use the computer name as DC1 and then name a domain dc1.com. Not recommended. This becomes highly confusing. When you refer to DC1, are you actually referring to the NetBIOS name of that domain, or are you referring to the DC1 as the computer name of the domain controller? In that scenario, in other words, if you had a domain called DC1, if you had a computer called DC1 and you're trying to create a new domain called dc1.com, you will notice that it would put over here DC1 with a numerical suffix such as 01. In our case, once again, this is unique. Let's click on the next key to continue. Over here, it's basically letting us know that it will be creating a domain and copying the files into the C drive in the Windows folder. It's going to make a new folder called NTDS. Basically stands for NT Directory Services. Over here, it also suggests that the Active Directory log will be created in the same folder, in the same partition. If you had two hard disks, it is recommended that you put the Active Directory log in a second hard disk so that the two hard disks can work independently, and this will give you a better performance on the Active Directory. I'm going to click on next to continue. Over here, it's reminding us that it's going to create a volume or a folder called sysvolve. This is where the Active Directory will actually be installed. One of the important things over here is that the sysvolve must be on an NTFS volume. In our case, our C drive was formatted as NTFS, so we have no issues. If your C drive was not NTFS, you would have to abort over here, make sure that your C drive is formatted as NTFS before you continue. Let's click on next, and now it's letting us know that, well, it could not contact a DNS server. And the reason for that is that we have not yet set up a DNS server. So this is the correct option for us. We want to do two things over here. We would like to create the benandbrady.com domain, as well as install and configure a new DNS server on this computer. I've already inserted the CD-ROM in this computer, so this option will do both for us. I'm going to click on next to continue, It's letting us know whether it needs to set permissions that is compatible with pre-Windows 2000 servers, namely Windows NT 4 or earlier machines, or to leave it for Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2003 operating systems. This is only for backward compatibility. There are certain permission types that are not compatible with Windows NT. In our case, all our operating systems will be Windows 2000 or better, so I'm going to leave the selection the way it is and then click on next to continue. Now it's going to ask me for the directory services restore mode administrator password. This is extremely important. Please remember that the directory services restore mode password is the password that you need in order to restore your Active Directory from backup. This password is different from the administrator's password to log on or to perform other activities on the system. So please remember, do not confuse this password with the password of the user administrator's account. This is a separate password. The only purpose of this password is to use it to restore the Active Directory if you're going to restore it from a backup. So over here, I'm going to select a password, Rainbow. So I'm going to type Rainbow, R-A-I-N-B-O-W, confirm the password, and then click on the next button to move on. Alright, so now we have the summary screen. This is basically saying that it is ready to create a domain called benandbrady.com. Here's the NetBIOS name of this domain, and it shows us the selections that we've made as far as putting the volume, the sys volume, and the NTDS on the C drive. I'm going to click on next to continue, and this is where it's going to start writing the domain. This process will take anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes. As soon as this process is finished, I'll join you once again. I'm going to just pause the video briefly at this point. Welcome back. The process took about 7 minutes to finish on this computer, and now it gives me the last screen basically saying that it has completed the Active Directory installation, and now I need to click on the finish button. Also, once again, please note the DNS was installed at the same time. Most probably it will ask you for the CD-ROM. Just make sure that the CD-ROM is in the computer for this process to go smoothly. Otherwise, it will simply prompt you to enter the CD-ROM and then click on next to continue. So I'm going to click on the finish button over here. And because this was a major change, we have actually installed we have installed our new domain benandbrady.com on DC1. It needs to restart the computer. So I'm going to click on restart now, and this will also break our connection from DC1. So let's click on that, and you'll notice in a moment it's going to shut down, and this connection will be lost. There we go. Okay, so back on the recording studio over here, we just created the domain called benandbrady.com on a computer, namely DC1. What are we going to do next? The next thing I'm going to do is, once this domain controller DC1 comes up, I'll give you a little tour of the Active Directory. Just show you what the Active Directory looks like, what objects to look out for. We will check out the computer names and the NetBIOS names of benandbrady.com, and then we will proceed ahead to actually perform a backup of a new domain, benandbrady.com. Once that backup is performed, we will use that backup to install an additional domain controller for this domain. So I'll take the backup on DC1, copy the backup from DC1 to DC2, and then do DC promo again on this computer called DC2 to install the additional domain controller of that domain. So eventually what will happen is we would have, here we go, DC1 already installed, DC2 will be created as the additional domain controller, and we are in the same domain, namely benandbrady.com, and then we will check the replication between these two domain controllers, so that if an object is created over here on DC1, it is easily replicated to DC2 and vice versa. Finally, we will go to our XP Professional client computer and then join this client to the benandbrady.com domain. This will finish our setup so that we can perform Active Directory labs. I'm going to minimize this, and then as soon as DC1 is up and running, I'll give you a tour of that. The domain controller DC1 just rebooted, so let's try to establish the connection one more time. So if you recall, DC1 connection was lost over here, so let's try to establish a connection one more time by double clicking on DC1 over here. He's trying to make a connection, and hopefully we'll be in soon. Also, while this is coming up, please remember that after you performed the DC promo and the computer restarted, do not be surprised when it takes forever and it says over here preparing network connections the first time it boots up. Usually it takes longer during that process in any case, but definitely the first time the computer is booting up, it will definitely take longer at that point. It's simply establishing the network connections because now it's an important computer now. It's the first domain controller for the domain known as benandbrady.com. So let's check out the values at this point. So here's our computer object DC1. I'm going to right click on it, go to properties, and then over here on the computer name screen, you can see over here the full computer name is dc1.benandbrady.com and a domain is called benandbrady.com. So that shows that this is a domain controller. The following also happened when you go to start admin tools. You will notice that now you have new tools over here that helps you configure the Active Directory. The one that we'll be using the most often will be Active Directory users and computers. So I'm going to click on that and then give you a little tour of the Active Directory. I'm going to just double click on this to get it out of the way. So here we go. Now, this is how you use the Active Directory tool. I'm going to just reposition these windows a little bit. Let's expand the domain benandbrady.com. So I'm going to expand the domain over here, and you will see these child objects appear under benandbrady.com. Here are some of the important ones. To begin with, there is a container called users. This is where all the default user accounts have been saved. The user accounts as well as groups. If you create a new user, you can simply go over here, right click, say new, and then create a new user, and you would have created a new user in the benandbrady.com domain. So that's the first thing. The second one is there is an object or a container called domain controllers. This is a container that contains all the computer accounts for the domain controllers for the benandbrady.com domain. In our case, at this point, we simply have one domain controller, namely DC1. Once we join DC2 to the benandbrady.com domain, that computer object will appear over here also. And the third one that I think is important for you to know is the computers container. This one contains the computer accounts of the clients of the benandbrady.com network. At this point, we haven't joined the client, so it is empty. Also, I would like you to observe the following. Go to View, and over there, make sure you turn on the advanced features. This makes sure that what this did was the following. It showed you a couple of other containers that we'll talk about later in the videos. And also, if you go to a user properties, if I right click on this user account and click on properties, it will show me all the tabs that are relevant for this user account. If you do not have the advanced features turned on, some of the features will be missing and you would not know why. So here's our Active Directory users and computers, and here's a domain benandbrady.com, and we checked out some of the default values and everything looks good at this point. The next object we will check would be, I clicked on a button that will disconnect me from the session. I just need to close the Active Directory users and computers program. So I'll do that. The next thing we'll check is the DNS. So let's go back to the start button, go to all programs, admin tools, and then let's click on DNS. If you recall, the DNS service was installed at the time of performing DC promo. So I'm going to expand our DNS server, which is DC1, and then expand our forward lookup zone. If you recall, just some basics about DNS. There are two types of zones, forward lookup and reverse lookup. Forward lookup zones are mandatory. You need a forward lookup zone for the domain benandbrady.com. So here was the forward lookup zone created for us. And in this zone, as you can see, at this point, we have only one computer. Let me just reposition this window a little bit. We have only one computer, DC1, whose IP address is 200.200.200.1. And as you can see that our domain controller is also the DNS server, namely the NS server, and it says it clearly over here that the name server NS is dc1.benandbrady.com. So our DNS is set correctly, and we are in business. Now what we need to do is the following. Going back to our figure over here, we need to perform a backup of the Active Directory on DC1. And then I'm going to take that backup and then take it to DC2 and then perform an Active Directory installation over there also. In other words, this will be an additional domain controller for the benandbrady.com domain. Now I don't have to do that. In order for me to make DC2 an additional domain controller, I simply have to go to DC2, run the DC promo process, and over there simply say that make this an additional domain controller. DC2 will connect DC1 and then perform the replication, and then it will become the second or the additional domain controller for this domain. I'm just showing you a different method. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this first method of replication. However, in Server 2003, Microsoft has created this new method whereby you can actually perform a backup, go to the other machine that will be the additional domain controller, and then restore the backup from there in order to install this as the additional domain controller. This has several advantages. The first one is, over here we have a LAN. In other words, we have a fast connection. If you were to do this on a WAN, this might be a slow process. Your WAN connection may not be reliable, and that could create other problems. So now we have the convenience of actually performing a backup and sending the backup on a USB drive or a tape drive to another location perhaps, and then they can use the backup to restore a domain controller on that computer, or to make a new domain controller on that computer. So this is a newer method, and we'll try that. This is the method that I've shown you in the lab in the labs as well. So I'm going to minimize this, and now we need to go to our second. We need to perform a backup on DC1. So let's do that. Let's go to the C drive of DC1, and over there I'm going to create a new folder called AD backup. So here we go, new folder. I'm going to call it AD backup. We will create the backup of the Active Directory and put it in this folder. So this is just for maintenance. I'm going to close this now. And now let's perform a backup of the Active Directory. In order to do that, you need to run the Windows 2003 backup tool. And you can run that by clicking on Start, clicking on Run, and then typing NT backup. So there we go. This will start the backup program. It should take a minute. It's looking for the backup devices. It's basically letting me know that the tape was not available, which is okay. And now it automatically or by default runs a wizard that will help us perform a backup or a restore. If you do not want to run the wizard, you can always uncheck this button, and next time when the backup program starts, it will not run the wizard for you. So let's run the wizard. It's simple, and what we are performing can be done very easily using the backup or the restore wizard. So I'm going to click on the next button. Now it's going to ask me, what do you want to do? Backup files or restore files? In the first case over here right now, we're going to back up the files. So I'm going to click on next, and now it's asking us, what do you want to back up? It can by default back up everything on this computer, including the Active Directory, as well as all the files and the folders and so forth. I'm really not interested in that. All I want to do is perform the backup of the Active Directory. So we're going to select, let me choose what to back up, click on the next button, and now we need to select exactly what needs to be backed up on this computer. So what I'm going to do is expand DC1, and just to give you a little tutorial over here, you can choose to back up exactly what you want. So as you can see, I expanded the C drive, and if I would like to back up a folder called Tools, I will simply click on this and then perform the backup. In our case, I'm going to minimize this. We need to back up what is known as the system state. Now, what is this thing called the system state? This is a collection of the entire Active Directory, the registry, all the settings of your COM class registration databases, and the device drivers that is in the system. So by backing up the system state, you have basically backed up all the necessary settings that will help you restore the Active Directory if needed. So let's check that, and then click on the next button. Now it's going to ask us, where do you want to back this up to? So we're going to click on the browse button over here, and this is where our housekeeping came in. We had created a folder called AD backup, so I'm going to double click on that. If you had not created the folder before, you could always go back over here and create a new folder on the fly. So we're going to select a folder that we created, AD backup, and I'm going to leave it as backup.bkf as a file name. So click on save, and then click on the next button to continue. It has everything that it needs to perform the backup, so I'm going to click on the finish button, and then it's going to start performing the backup for me. This should take a few more minutes also. By default, this backup is at least about 240-250 megabytes, maybe more, again depending on how much information you have in the Active Directory. So as soon as this process is finished, I'll join you once more in our video presentation. There we go, the process is finished. It says over here it took about 2 minutes and 43 seconds. That is after the backup actually started. It actually took about 5 to 7 minutes. I'm going to click on the close button, and then our backup is now done. So let's check it out. If I were to go to the C drive, to the folder called AD backup, and here is a file, backup.bkf. It's about 433,000 kilobytes. So now what we're going to do is the following. What I need to do is transport this folder AD backup from here to DC2. In order to do that, what I'm going to do is click on copy over here and then go to start, run, and then let's type the UNC name for DC2. So I'm going to type DC2 and then slash, and let's type $C. The $C is an easy or convenient way for the administrators to access the entire disk on a remote computer. So what this is saying is go to DC2 and on DC2 access $C. The $ means administrative share. So I'm going to click on the OK button, and here we go. We are actually looking at the hard disk or the C drive of domain controller 2. Over here I'm going to simply paste this folder so that our backup is now on DC2. Once this is done, what we're going to do is we'll go to DC2 and then take this backup and use it to actually perform the installation of the second domain controller. So let's do that. It's going to take a few seconds. I'm going to join you on DC2 as soon as this process finishes. I'm going to pause the video over here briefly. The process just finished. I'm going to close this window for the copying process. Close it. I'm sorry. Let's click on this. Let's close this window as well. So this is our DC2. Let's go back to DC. I'm sorry, that was DC1. Let's go back to DC2. And over here, let's log in one more time. And if I were to go to the C drive of this computer, you will see that I have my AD backup folder with the backup file. Very good. Now, what we're going to do is the following. We're going to restore this Active Directory into a folder on this computer before we actually perform the DC promo process. This is important. This is sometimes misleading also. A lot of people, what they think is they will go to this computer, run the DC promo process and say that, okay, I have the backup of the Active Directory, go ahead and install the additional domain controller on this computer. It will not work. You actually have to restore the Active Directory into a separate folder and then run the DC promo process. So in order to do that, what we'll do is the following. We'll first create a new folder over here. Again, more housekeeping. We'll create a folder called AD Restore. So here's the folder, AD Restore. And then in this folder, I'm going to restore the Active Directory. How do you do that? Well, let's go back to the Windows Server 2003 backup program. So in order to do that, let's go to Run. And then over here, I'm going to type NT backup. This time, instead of saying backup, we will say restore. So let's see how this works. Should be coming up any moment. Usually when you run the backup program for the very first time on a computer, it takes a while because it's trying to inventory the drives that you have on that computer. So here we go. It's looking for backup devices and it should be coming up shortly. And if you recall, as soon as it comes up, it's going to run the wizard. So we'll use the wizard one more time. I'm going to click on the next button. This time, you may have guessed it, I will click on Restore Files and Settings. Click on the next button. And now it wants to know what to restore. Well, let's help it out a little bit. I'm going to say expand this. It says it couldn't find anything. The reason for that is, by default, there was nothing cataloged on this computer simply because we performed the backup on DC1 and we are currently on DC2. So let's help it a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to browse and find the backup that we had performed. So here's a backup. Here it is. And now I'm going to say, okay, look into that backup so that it knows exactly what to restore. So it's going to take a while. And now it's going to, here's the system state that we would like to restore. Okay, so I selected a system state, click on the next button, and now it's going to ask us, tell me, where do you want to restore? By default, if you do nothing, it's going to restore it to the original location. Well, we do not want to do that. So I'm going to click on the advanced button and then restore files to, I'm going to select alternate location. Again, this is important, folks. Otherwise, you'll be replacing the existing backup. We don't want to do that. We want to keep our backup and the restore files separate so that the DC promo process can easily find exactly what we need to give it. So here is our C drive, and we would like to restore it to the folder called AD Restore. So here's a backup, here's a restore. I'm going to click on OK, click on Next, and now it's going to say, what do you want to do with the files on this new folder? I'm going to just leave the default, leave existing files as recommended. restore the security settings as recommended, and then perform the restore. Once again, this process should take a few minutes. As soon as this process is finished, I'll join you one more time, and from that point forward, we will actually use the restore to perform the installation of the additional domain controller. The restore process just finished, and as you can see over here, it took about 11.5 minutes. So the backup process and the restore process is now over. Also, please remember, I know it took a while to do this, but can you imagine if the same information were to go across the wire from one computer to another? When you make the second domain controller, you would have spent that much time in any case. So now let's click on the close button, and let's check out a few things on DC2 now. Let's go to the TCP/IP properties of DC2. So I'm going to go to the TCP/IP properties, and then just to make sure that our DNS is pointing to DC1, namely 200.200.200.1. So let's verify that. Here's our IP address of DC2, 200.2, and our DNS is 200.1. Wonderful. Now we are ready to start making DC2 the additional domain controller of the benandbrady.com domain. Let me just show you one more thing. I'm going to right click on the computer object DC2, go to properties, and over here under computer name, as you can see, this is not a domain yet. It is just a work group, and the computer name is DC2. So let's start making this guy a domain controller. So I'm going to click on start, go to run, and then type DC promo. Now just to show you the traditional method of doing this, we won't actually follow through on this, but just to give you an idea, I'm going to click on type DC promo and click on OK. Now I'm going to click on the next button, and then over here once again we'll say next because we're not worried about NT or Windows 95. And over here I'm going to select the additional domain controller for an existing domain. If I click on next and continue, what will happen is DC2 will attempt to actually contact DC1. I'm going to close this by saying yes over here. DC2 will actually contact DC1 over the Ethernet cable and then transfer the Active Directory from DC1 to DC2. That's the traditional method of doing this, and it is great on a local area network. In this advanced session of Active Directory, I'm showing you a new method that is valid in Windows Server 2003 domains only, that lets you first backup the domain and then restore from the backup. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to click on start, run. This time, instead of just typing DC promo, we will modify it with a switch. So DC promo /ADV for advanced features. And I'm going to click on the OK button. Oops, sorry. Let's start this again. Need to put a space over here. And there we go. The spaces are sometimes annoyingly important. Sometimes spaces are not required. Sometimes they make a world of a difference. And as you can see over there, we had to type DC promo space and then the switch /ADV. So here we go. Welcome to the Active Directory installation wizard. I'm going to click on the next button. Once again, we'll forward the screen one more. Now, what we need to do is create an additional domain controller for the existing domain. So I'll select that, click on the next button. Now here we go. This is the traditional method. I can either do that from here, or because I'm using the advanced switch, I have the ability to do this. And look at this. It's looking for the restore into a folder called NTDS restore. Obviously our folder is not called the same thing. So I'm going to click on the browse button and navigate to find our restore folder, which is AD restore. Click on the OK button and then go on next. Once again, please remember, you will not see this option if you simply started DC promo by typing DC promo. You have to type DC promo space /ADV to actually see this option. Click on the next button, and now it will attempt to restore from the backup. Do you want to configure this additional domain controller as a global catalog? I'm going to say no over here. We already have the global catalog on DC1. So I'm going to click on the next button over here. Here we go. You need the username and the password of the enterprise admin of the domain benandbrady.com. So that would be administrator, and our password is password. This is just to make sure that nobody can just simply install server on a computer and make that computer an additional domain controller and get all the settings and all the objects from the Active Directory on that domain. This is a security feature. So I'm going to click on the next button, and now it will verify my credentials, and once again it is letting me know that I'm going to create a new domain controller on this computer, and it's going to copy the files on a C drive. If If I click on the next button, we should see the information on the sys valve. It must be on an NTFS volume. I'm going to accept all these, go on to the next one, and if you recall from our discussion before, our directory services restore mode admin password was rainbow. So I'm going to type that. Once again, the password is rainbow. Click on the next button, and now it's ready. Here's the summary screen. I'm going to click on the next button to start this process. So let's do that. And here we go. If you notice, the graphics is a little bit different. This time it is simply not writing the Active Directory. It is actually saying that it's getting the Active Directory from, here's the picture of the domain, from the benandbrady.com domain, actually physically from the computer known as DC1. This process will once again take a few minutes. Once this process is finished, it is going to restart DC1. At that point, I will restart DC1 as well as DC2, and then we will make sure that our domain is replicated. So I'm going to pause the video over here. After this finishes, I'm going to restart DC2 and then restart DC1 as well, and then join you once again. Well, DC2 just booted up, and what I did was, just as a precautionary measure, and I'll tell you why in a moment, I also rebooted DC1. So once again, DC1 and DC2 are both up and running. Let's go to DC2 and check out its settings. So I'm going to go back to our desktop connection over here for domain controller 2. Here we go, DC2. The first thing we'll verify is whether or not it joined a domain. So let's right click on this, click on properties, and under the computer name, let's say it says dc2.benandbrady.com, and it belongs to the benandbrady.com domain. So that's great. Now let's also verify that the Active Directory is present on DC2. So let's go to Start, click on Admin Tools, and here we go. Here is the different programs for Active Directory. We're going to click on Active Directory Users and Computers, and we should be able to see a domain one more time. If you recall, it's always a good idea to actually turn on the advanced features, and I've done exactly that. Now, let's verify one more thing. If you recall, clicking on domain controllers now should show me two computer objects, and there we go, DC1, DC2. So in our benandbrady.com domain, we have two domain controllers. If I click on a computers container over here, there are no clients, and we'll be doing that very soon. Let's now close this program, and let me show you another program in Active Directory known as Active Directory Sites and Services. So here we go. I'm going to pick it up over here. Active Directory Sites and Services. This is a little tool that ensures that you can replicate between domain controllers in the same domain. So by default, it creates a new site. Now, what is a site? We'll be talking about this in later videos, but just shortly over here, a site is nothing but a geographical location in which you have an Active Directory domain. So here is our first site. By default, it is given the name default first site name, and then in there is a container called servers. If I expand that, we have our two servers, DC1 and DC2. So if I expand DC1, you have this link over here called NTDS settings, and over here is the other domain controller. So we are in the DC1 object. DC1 and DC2 can replicate with each other. This replication takes place automatically every few minutes in a LAN environment, or if you have domain controllers in different sites, then you can set up a replication schedule. In our case, we have two domain controllers in the same location, in the same site, so by default they will replicate from time to time. You can also force replication by clicking on this link over here and then right clicking and say replicate now. You should get a message. Here we go. Active Directory has replicated the connections. Similarly, if you go to DC2, you can replicate from, click on NTDS settings, you can replicate from DC1 to DC2. Once again, select it, right click and say replicate now. Once in a while, what will happen is that, especially in the case of a new domain, once the second domain controller comes up, you will notice that this link is not available and you cannot replicate. In fact, if you try to replicate, you get some error messages. Do not get too worried about it. All you have to do is make sure that the first domain controller is shut down the second domain controller also, and then start domain controllers in the right order. Start the first one first, give it a few minutes, and then start the second domain controller. You will notice that the replication objects will sync in, and then you should be able to replicate from that point forward. Now, exactly what do we mean by this? Well, in our domain known as benandbrady.com, we have actually two domain controllers, DC1, DC2. However, there is just one domain or one Active Directory database. This database is a shared database. It is shared by both DC1 as well as DC2. The advantage of this is that I can go to any domain controller in my domain and create a new Active Directory object such as a user or an organizational unit, and all the other domain controllers will receive the same objects via replication. So let's do that. We are on DC2, so let's go to Active Directory users and computers, and just to test this feature, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new OU, an organizational unit, in the benandbrady.com domain. So here we go. I'm going to right click over here, say new OU, and then we're going to call it test. I'm going to click on the OK button. Alright, so now we created this OU called test on DC2, domain controller 2. I'm going to minimize this, and let's go to DC1. Once Active Directory replicates, both these domain controllers should have the same object. So let's try that out. I'm going to go to Start and then go to Active Directory users and computers of this domain controller, namely DC1, and verify if the object actually has shown up. Here we go. It did show up. Now, if it did not, all you have to do is go to Sites and Services and manually replicate. Some of the objects may show up as late as 15 minutes. This is because the knowledge consistency checker looks for a path and then replicates the domain ever so frequent. Let's now close this program, and now, last but not the least, let's join a client to the benandbrady.com domain. So I'm going to minimize all the screens that were open over here, and let's go to a client connection, which is client 1. Here, I already have one open, so let's go over there. Now we need to join this client to the domain. Once again, the computer name is client 1. To verify that, let's right click on the computer name, go to the properties, and then over here under computer name, you can see that the name of the computer is client 1 and it belongs to the work group called work group. So I'm going to close this. Also, let's check the TCP IP properties. We need to make sure that we have connectivity. In our network, I know we've already verified before, but let's double check a few things. In the TCP IP properties, here's the IP address. Once again, a reminder, the client will have an IP address of 200.11. And here's a DNS server, 200.200.200.1, namely our computer called DC1. So I'm going to close this. All this is just fine. And now we are ready to join this client to the benandbrady.com domain. To do this, you need to right click on the computer object, which is in this case is client 1, go to properties, and then go to the computer hardware tab one more time. This time we will click on this button over here to rename this computer or join a domain, click change. So let's click on the change button, and here are the options. You are in the work group, we need to join the domain, so we need to click on a link called domain and then type Ben and Brady. You can type .com as well. I've just this has been my experience and observation that if you just leave the NetBIOS name, the joining of the domain goes a little bit faster. So let's click on the OK button, and here we go. This is very important. It needs the credentials of the enterprise or the domain admin so that somebody cannot simply create a new computer on which they install Windows XP or some other operating system and simply join the domain. You need the permission of the domain admin or the enterprise admin to join the domain. So here we go. This is the credential of the enterprise admin. So the username is administrator and our password is password. And click on OK. It's going to send this message to the benandbrady.com domain, and then it will create a computer object for us. This again should take a few seconds. Once this is done, client 1 will also, we need to restart client 1 so that it becomes a member of the domain, and then we'll continue from that point forward. I'm going to pause the video over here one more time. Well, client 1 just restarted, so let's go back to the client 1 desktop connection, and whoa, there's a different background over here. I'm going to keep this one the way it is. And here's a computer object client 1. If I right click on this object, go to properties, this time you will notice that it is a member of the benandbrady.com domain. And here's the full computer name, client1.benandbrady.com. So let's close this, and let's go back to, let me minimize this. Let's go back to one of our domain controllers, doesn't matter which one. I'm going to go to DC1. Let's log in one more time. And let's now verify our Active Directory. So I'm going to go to Admin Tools and then go to Active Directory Users and Computers. And this time, if you remember, there was a container called computers. In the computers container should be a client called client1. So our domain is working just fine. Everything in the domain is ready for us to do advanced labs in Active Directory. Let's verify one last thing before we stop this particular video. Let's go to the DNS server, which again is on DC1. So I'm on DC1 now. Let's go to admin tools, and then let's go to our DNS server. So in order to do that, I need to click on this link called DNS. This time the DNS should have 3 entries, one for each of our computers. Let's verify that. Here's benandbrady.com domain, and here we go. DC1 has been given the IP address of 200.1, DC2 has been given the IP address of 200.2, and client1 has been registered with an IP address of 200.11. So our network is set up just fine. This is how, from this point on, the way the network will work. Going back to our figure over here, our DNS server and the domain controller is on this one. This computer DC2 has the additional domain controller on it. So in other words, these two are sharing the benandbrady.com domain, and here's a client computer. Every time the client needs to resolve a name on this benandbrady.com network, it sends a query to DC1. DC1 will look up in its own DNS database, give the answer to client1, and then client1 will have connectivity with all the other computers. In this manner, the DNS services will be provided by DC1. So to summarize, what we have done in this lab is the following. We created a new domain called benandbrady.com on DC1. We then backed up the Active Directory on benandbrady.com. We copied that backup to DC2. We actually performed a restore in a different folder on DC2, and then used that restore to create an additional domain controller on DC2 for benandbrady.com domain. Then we tested the replication between the two using Active Directory sites and services. Finally, we joined client1 to benandbrady.com, and then consistently we've been taking a tour of the Active Directory, namely the different containers in Active Directory users and groups. Active Directory users and computers. We went to Active Directory sites and services to see how the domain can be replicated manually if needed. Last but not the least, we took several tours to DNS to make sure that all the computer objects have been registered in a DNS database. Our domain setup is now complete. This also concludes our video. I thank you very much for watching this video and hope to see you soon in a different video in Active Directory.